Hi everyone, I hope you had a really wonderful lunch and that you're continuing to have some great conversations. I'm really excited to introduce our next keynote, and this is about the BC BDAR and Aggressor reporting project. So I just really want to welcome Andrea and Courtney. So Andrea is a project coordinator, and Courtney DeMoe is the research lead. Courtney has lived experience relevant to the project and loves that she gets to support her community in this role. She's also worked as a UX designer, in a workshop, and a drop-in facilitator, and she's a social justice writer. Andrea has over a decade of nonprofit experience bringing community together, planning, implementing, and advocating for basic human rights such as affordable housing and food security. She also has lived experience relevant to this project, which she is very much proud and honored to be a part of. So I really want to welcome Andrea and Courtney, who are going to give us a really detailed sharing about this amazing project. So I'll hand it over to the both of you. Thanks so much.
Yay, thank you. So I'm going to stand and maybe move around and maybe move my arms around a lot because I can't help it, I'm Italian. I also just wanted to express my gratitude for being on the traditional and ceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. It's really an honor to be here today. And I also want to say it's really an honor to be here. I'm going to make a bad joke, sorry, bear with me, living in community, to be with all of our peeps. And the reason I wanted to express that gratitude so much at this moment is just to let you know that Courtney and I are coming in today a little bit of a hot mess express, I'll call it. I'm grieving. I just lost my father last week, and Courtney's not feeling very well today. So we're going to do our best, but we might not have time to take questions depending on how long our presentation is. So just, we're human, we're amongst our favorite peeps and peers, and just, wanted to express that humanity, because that's important. So, why are we here today? I don't really need to talk about this very much, because I think you understand that sex workers in BC experience higher rates of violence than the general population. And of course, those rates of violence are way higher if you are, a quote-unquote marginalized person or experiencing multiple different intersectionalities in your life. It's pretty real. What we know is violence that occurs towards sex workers often occurs without any consequences for the perpetrators, or often no justice for the victims. So I also just wanted to make sure that before we go on with our presentation, we're all on the same page around the terminology and the definitions that we use when we talk about what is a bad date and what is bad date reporting. So the definition that we use with BC BDAR is that a bad date is anything that a sex worker doesn't want themselves or other people to experience. The reason I often bring this up when we do our presentation is because people have different ideas of what violence is or what their threshold is. We'll probably talk about that a little bit throughout the presentation. So a bad date can be time wasting, it can be creepy behavior, and then of course it could be violence, it could be theft, any of these things, but it's just anything that you wouldn't want yourself or one of your peers to experience. I also wanted to just talk about what is a bad date report. I'm sure many of you are aware, but again, just really important to be on the same page about terminology. So a bad date report is a peer-led network where sex workers can share reports and information anonymously and confidentially with other sex workers. So it's really about warning your community and keeping one another safe in a really anonymous and safe way. And one thing I wanted to acknowledge is how bad dates are collected or distributed. There's a wide range, like it all depends on the context, it depends on your geographical location, it depends on what sector of sex work you're involved in, or sometimes all of that all at once. But some of the ways that we see bad date reports being collected are, a web interface, so maybe logging into Peers Resource Society and filling in the drop-down information about what you've experienced and having someone follow up with you. It could be walking into to Wish Drop-In Center and speaking to a support worker and having them take your report and provide supports to you afterwards. It can be you're out on the street and you're just telling your peers about what just happened in real time, trying to keep one another safe. We call those whisper networks. Or it could be something like we will refer to it as an informal bad date reporting system, but I want to say that it's actually quite formal, where sex workers have things like Excel spreadsheets or perhaps a social media account or a Slack channel where they can share information with one another. And those take a lot of resources. The formal reports, obviously, through organizations require funding to keep those going. And the quote-unquote informal reports really require a lot of volunteer labor, a lot of emotional labor to keep those going. So I just want to honor that there are many different ways to do bad date reporting. So a question that we sometimes get, and I'm sure not from this audience, but again, it's about just setting the context and the background about why we're here, is people go, well, why don't sex workers report to the police? And you can see on the slide, there's a lot of reasons there, and there's probably a million more that we just simply can't identify all of them. But really, the stigma, not being believed, fear of retaliation, a sense of what's the point or fatalism about reporting, reliving trauma, fears of deportation. A lot of the things that we've heard today throughout this conference and issues that we're trying to address collectively are reasons why sex workers aren't reporting to police. Okay. So now that there's a little bit of context about what bad date reporting is, what bad dates are, I want to talk about really why we're here today. And that's because the BC BDAR project, the BC Bad Date and Aggressor Reporting Project, the biggest mouthful ever, really grew its roots right here, maybe not actually in this exact location, but here at the Living in Community Conference that happened back in 2019. And it grew from the recommendations that came from that conference. So much like what we're doing here today, where we're kind of being asked to think about next steps or recommendations, that's what happened back in 2019. And that's how the BC BDAR project got started. So I'm actually really excited to see what's gonna come out of this year's conference, because if it has the potential to grow something like the project that we're a part of, that's so freaking sweet. So I wanted to just tell you what those recommendations were that came out of the 2019 conference, and you can kind of use that, I guess, as a marker on what we've been up to with our projects. I don't want to call it a report card, but it kind of, when I was putting this together, I was like, kind of has that vibe a little bit. So the first recommendation was to develop a provincial bad date reporting process in collaboration with organizations serving sex workers. The process must meet the needs of sex workers who travel and work in different environments at different times. The second recommendation was to develop a reporting mechanism with specific information relevant to sex workers that's comprehensive but can also be tailored. And the example that was in that recommendation was description of vehicle not necessary for indoor workers. So to be able to have the selection of what you wanted to see. The third recommendation was, get that cash, get that comprehensive funding so we can actually do the work to develop the system itself and make sure that it's like a safe, protected system. And then the final recommendation was to pool our efforts together to lobby for large-scale systemic change at policy and legislative levels. So those were the recommendations that came through the 2019 conference. And then 2020 happened. So what happened afterwards? There was some really amazing progress that happened. The biggest thing was that a working group was developed. And it's the same working group that we have today that helps guide us through the work that we do. So our working group is comprised of Living in Community BC, Wish Drop-In Center Society here in Vancouver Downtown East Side, PACE Society in Downtown East Side, Swan Vancouver, and then Peers Resource Society in Victoria. And I will, you probably just heard me say Vancouver a lot, and I'll touch on that later. But our wonderful working group put in a grant application through our funders at the Law Foundation of BC, and we were awarded $1 million to do the work that we're doing over a period of quote-unquote 3 years, but we'll talk about that also. So of course the project had some starts and stops just because of the nature of the pandemic, but things really kicked into high gear in the summer of 2021 when I started. But basically we really had to get together. We had to get things going and figure out what the plan was based on the funding that we were awarded and how we were going to do it and how long it was going to take and who we needed to hire and who we needed to collaborate with and all of the good things. And yeah, so really the purpose of the BC BDAR project is to create a formal, provincially integrated or province-wide bad date reporting system. So we know systems already exist, as I mentioned, in BC, but the idea is to be able to not only tie those together so they can share information, but also to reach new communities, rural communities, basically everywhere across BC, because we know sex workers are everywhere, that they have access to this system to report bad dates and to warn community members about what's going on. So just quickly, who's involved in the project? I already talked about our working group. It's in Vancouver, 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 Vancouver. We also, because of that, this is a province-wide project, developed a regional advisory group. So we have members from 4 different regions across BC. I think everyone's here today presenting, which is really exciting. And the purpose of that group is to obviously put in a more a smaller community or regional rural perspective into the work that we're doing so that what we're building also works for everyone in the province, not just Vancouver, Vancouver, Vancouver. I love Vancouver, but. And then we started a peer advisory group. And I think we also have all members of our peer advisory group here today, which feels so freaking rad. Love you all, you're awesome. And our peer advisory group exists again to really keep us in check, like honestly, to keep Courtney and myself and our working group in alignment with like what is actually on the ground happening. And I'll talk about other ways that sex workers continue to be integrated, obviously, into our project, but to have sort of the checks and balances of that group, make sure that we're doing things in a way that's meaningful and not for this like top-down prescriptive approach that we see so often. So yeah, then there's myself and Courtney. We hired in November 2021, which was the best day ever. And then we have our funders, the Law Foundation of BC and the Ministry of Public Safety, who gave us some money just about a year ago. I am not going to get into the nuance of project phases because there is so much But I will say that initially this was going to be a 3-year project. My favorite thing to say while working with Courtney and the working group in particular is it takes as long as it takes. Again, there's been a lot of conversation about like colonial timelines and pressures, and in order to do good community work, like Sylvia mentioned this morning, it takes time. We want to be thorough. We want to make sure that we're hearing from sex workers and we're making this right from the get-go and not having to go back and not breaking trust and. So right now, we added on another year, but I think there might be another one. But year 4 will really be an exciting year, like where the system will be out and being utilized. The first 2 years were really about setting up our systems, and a big part of that was really making sure that we did due diligence with our consultation process. So that was one of the goals of our project, was that we are not going to build anything. We're not going to build a tool without hearing, obviously, from the people who are going to be using this tool and who are the experts on like what is needed. So we developed a consultation process, and it was a co-creative process. So all of the different ways that we thought might be good to hear from folks, we made sure to hear from all of you first and give like a check of approval as to whether those methods would be something that would be meaningful, something people would participate in. So we did sharing circles. So we had connected with community organizations to host basically focus group discussions with their folks, so they would have someone facilitating who they already knew and trusted, and they would be amongst peers who they already knew and trusted to talk about our research questions, which Courtney will talk about a bit later. So we did sharing circles. We had what we called kitchen table talks. So it was basically that focus group method, but no facilitator, all peer-led, all peers getting together and just working through a workbook of our research questions together. We did online forums, and we also had an online workbook survey through SurveyMonkey, so people could take the time and just go through that workbook on their own if they wanted. Supports were available during and after if required, and we were able to pay a $150 honorarium to everyone for their expertise because, yeah, y'all are the consultants of this project. So, so that was our consultation phase. We are just, we did that for 6 months. We just wrapped up at the end of June. And now Courtney and I are swimming in so much amazing data and information that we are processing. And the goal is to write a report. That report has 2 goals within itself. One is to share like what we heard from everyone in BC. And the other goal is that that's going to be the roadmap that we use to actually build the system itself. Again, we're not building something that isn't going to be like what you all want. And I just want to also say that throughout these processes, like we're involving sex workers in every step of the way. So the research that we're now doing and the analysis, we're going to be bringing in peers to help us to look at that data and make sure that we're getting things right and that it's like reflecting what actually we're hearing. So that's that, and then we'll be doing, once we build the system itself, like a very co-creative, collaborative process. So if you've been involved with the project, this is like not the end. We're gonna keep inviting people in and inviting more people in so we can get their feedback and make sure that everything we're doing together. And that also includes the report too. Once we have a draft of that, we will be having opportunities for people to look at that draft report and give their feedback as well. Yeah, so that's just a brief overview of the consultation process that we've done. I've already talked a little bit of the system development. That's our next phase, and we're really starting that in the new year, although we have done some work, some prep work around that. But yeah, it's going to be that co-creative design process. Courtney is the tech guru, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but it'll be collaborative. And then we want to make sure that what we put out is actually functioning and working, so we'll have people that can come and like test the system and make sure that it makes sense. And that's both from a sex worker perspective as well as an organization perspective, like if it's working for your staff, etc. And then we'll release the system, hopefully some point in 2024. And then with that, there's going to be a real big push for education and training and advocacy about why we need this tool. And also in that phase of the project, again, we're really going to be leaning into our community and bringing peers in to do, we'll be training folks and helping, having paid opportunities to get the word out and to just make sure that everyone's using this tool from across the province. And then after that, it's going to be iterative releases. This sector that we are all in is huge, and the wide variety of people, their backgrounds, their needs, there's so many diverse needs that we have to think about when we create this system. So it will likely be iterative the way that we release it. That first release that we do, we're really going to be focusing on making sure that those who are experiencing the most amount of violence, the highest rates of violence, that tool is there for them on first release. And then from there we can build and build off of that. And really when you build something that's accessible for those who need it most, it ends up being accessible for everyone. Yeah, and then before I pass things over to Courtney, who has much more interesting information, I just like the overview project lady. Really a big part of this project is around advocacy. So like I said, we've heard so much rich information from all of you about your experiences with the so-called justice system, your experiences with police, all of this, and from that we can write a recommendation report to lend our voice to all of the amazing work that's going on across Canada around decrim and just sex workers' rights. So that's part of, that's a major goal of our project as well. And then of course we're going to be advocating and working our asses off to make sure that this tool is something that's sustainable and that won't just be put up on a shelf. We want it to exist until we no longer need to have it anymore because violence against sex workers isn't a thing. So that's the other major part of our project. So I'm gonna stop rambling. I'm gonna pass things over to Courtney, who's gonna talk to us, just about some of our research, very preliminary research findings.
Hey everybody. So, like Andrea mentioned, I'm not feeling the best. I've been dealing with some insomnia. I've had maybe a total of 25 hours of sleep in the last week and did not get any sleep last night. So if my brain kind of goes off the rails and I pause for a second, I'll pick it up eventually, don't worry.
We got you.
Yeah. So yeah, along with the community consultation we've been doing, I've also been doing an environment scan of talking with organizations doing bad date reporting, really worldwide. I talked with every organization in BC doing bad date reporting, most of the big ones in Canada, and then a few select international ones, primarily because kind of the field of doing bad date reporting over a region bigger than a city is very, very, very new. Most bad date systems that have existed for the last 40 years are really city-based, maybe expanding past that city a little bit, and often really confined to a specific sector of sex work within that city. So these kind of more expansive systems like we're trying to build are very new. I spoke with National Ugly Mugs UK, Ugly Mugs Ireland, Project Jasmine in France, Red Files and Red in Australia, which have similar names, but they're different things. Anyway, talked to all sorts of folks. And that's kind of what I'm gonna focus on findings-wise today. Because I was present for all those interviews, I kind of have a good sense of what that data is. And like Andrea said, we got community consultation data from like a bunch of different means. We have 8,000 lines of data, and we still haven't like dug deep enough into it for me to, or us to speak authoritatively to what we heard from y'all. So yeah, I'm going to be focusing more on what we heard from organizations, which I know is annoying, but we will come back to y'all once we hear from community. And like, we were present for a lot of the conversations that happened during community consultations. We have been able to look over some of the data, and so like, there are things that I'll be sprinkling in, and what I'll be talking about will be really informed by what we've seen in community consultation so far. But that said, since that analysis of community consultation info is still underway, there is a chance that like some of the stuff I talk about right now, we'll start doing that analysis piece and really, okay, maybe like that thing that I mentioned before doesn't really align with what the community wants or needs, in which case we may have to make those changes. If that's the case, we'll be communicating that very clearly. So just know that like everything I say from here on just kind of has a little bit of an asterisk to it. Also just recognizing, like Andrea said, it's going to be an iterative process. Whatever we release at first is going to be a bit bare bones. We'll flesh it out as we go. So like, as much as I'm talking about kind of like a menu of options that we can go with here, not everything's going to be there right off the bat, you know? Yeah, so that's the caveats. And with that, I'll start talking about some of the findings. So I split the findings into two different sections. Challenges that we can kind of foresee happening and we're already starting to see, and then ideas and strategies that have come up in research so far. So I'm going to do 5 of each. There's obviously so many, more than just 5 for each of these things. I'll probably connect a few here and there. We're rambling today, it's great. I'm on so many energy drinks right now. So if I'm rambling, that's where we're at. So, oh yeah, another thing about these challenges is like, some of this is going to be a little bit obvious. We know a lot of this, you all know a lot of this, but we need to highlight it anyway just so that y'all know that we're not missing the very obvious, and we're also highlighting the kind of big pieces that have come through already. So number 1 is that identifying as a sex worker is complicated. There are a lot of folks who don't really like the term sex worker. Some find it just too generic and academic. Some people find it a little too risque and explicit. And many folks don't see their ways of trading sex as sex work explicitly. And a lot of the frustration that folks have around the term sex work comes down to the fact that openly identifying with sex work is risky. It comes with a lot of risk, and that risk is enhanced for marginalized folks. It enhances those marginalizations. So the more marginalized folks are, the more hesitance there can be towards terms like sex work, especially openly identifying with terms like sex work. Another thing we wanted to highlight is that that risk is really enhanced in smaller communities. And when I say smaller communities, I'm not just talking like rural, I'm not just talking Merritt. I'm talking about like ethnic groups within larger cities where it's a smaller community within a big city, as well as street-based communities like in the downtown east side, like in Surrey. Word travels fast in those areas, and so to openly identify as a sex worker, to have the term sex work used about you can be more risky in those smaller, tight-knit communities. Number two is that, like Andrea said, the sex work industry is so huge and varied, so many different sectors, so many different needs. It's really hard to like imagine another sector or industry that is so varied and like has so many different needs and comfort levels. Yeah, it's a lot. And in talking with bad date systems, very, very few of them expand or integrate across more than one very specific sector. Usually it's femme-presenting indoor workers or femme-presenting outdoor workers. There are a few here and there that are specific to masked folks. There's plenty that try to integrate masked folks but don't do it very well. Yeah, there's so many different intersections, and trying to encompass all of that into one system is going to take a lot, and take a lot of creative problem solving as well. The next one is our favorite privacy versus accessibility concern. So if y'all participated in our community consultations, this probably looks familiar because we identified this early enough that we actually had a whole question devoted to this. But I'm going to talk about it a bit because it's very abstract, which is annoying, but it's important. Obviously, with bad date reporting, both privacy and accessibility are really important. It's really important that the folks who need access to bad date reports get access, as well as it's really important that those reports are kept private from the folks who don't need access. Yeah, and so like we want to max out both those stats, right? We want to make sure that it's as private and as accessible as possible, but there are times where those two things can be at odds with one another. For example, when accessing any sort of sex work specific space, there needs to be some sort of, is filtering the right word? Some sort of making sure that the folks that are accessing that space are themselves sex workers, do need access to that space. That can be just in the form of self-identification, which is a very accessible means, but can come with some privacy issues. Or on the other hand, it can be something where you are needing somebody to provide an ad to prove that they're a sex worker, or get referred from another sex worker, or whatever it is. And that can provide more privacy, but it can become more, or it can become less accessible to folks. Like not everybody has online ads that they can share. Not everybody is connected in community and has safe community members that can vouch for them in a system, or have community members who are already connected to the XYZ system. All those barriers that Andrea mentioned before. So this one's gonna it's a really big concern, and it can be a tricky one to balance. Every organization I talked to kind of falls somewhere different on the spectrum. So yeah, we're gonna have to figure out what's necessary to max out both those stats. Another challenge is that timing of taking a report really matters. From what we've been hearing so far, what we've seen is that folks are really more likely to share reports kind of in the moment, shortly after a bad date happens. The longer after the bad date, the less likely people just want to get back into it, the less likely do they want to talk about it, get into the details. And those details can be harder to recall as well. So yeah, getting to folks shortly after those bad dates is really important, and finding a way to meet people where they're at. That's not always the case though. Not everybody wants to report immediately afterwards. It's not useful in every context. And something we heard a lot as well is that folks want to, like immediately following a bad date, especially if they were robbed or they didn't get paid for that date, they just want to get back to work, just want to get money. So allowing for like a quick way to report, as well as a way to like follow up for folks who can't report in the moment but would like to report eventually, also very important. The last challenge we wanted to focus on is like just the importance of demonstrating results. One big barrier that we're hearing from folks a lot is a sense of fatalism. Like, what's the point of reporting? How is it going to be helpful for me? How is it going to be helpful for others? And that's really demonstrated for us the need to provide and demonstrate tangible results. And by provide, I don't mean just like say, hey, here's the results that you can get. I mean like actually doing the work to get results for folks. And that's really, really key for building that trust and getting buy-in for the whole concept of bad date reporting. Just in like an anecdotal sense, in the community consultations that I facilitated, there was more than one instance where there was a bit of a sense of fatalism towards reporting, and then one individual would share an experience they had where reporting was really, really helpful. And that you could kind of see the interest peaked around that. So finding ways to demonstrate that, really important. So next I'm going to get into some ideas and strategies here. This is a bit of that kind of menu I was talking about of things we might implement. At this point in time, because we haven't heard from community, we haven't really made any design decisions about what the system we're building is going to look like. So this is, again, just that menu. It's not a set, this is what things are going to be. It's just some ideas. And I'd really love to hear y'all's thoughts about it as we mingle after this. So the first one, and it's first because it was just so loud and clear from everybody, from organizations, from community members, the need for searchability and categories. Everybody wants a bad date system that you can search by phone number, by email address, license plate number, names, whatever that is. People really, really need and want that. The other aspect is being able to filter by category. Usually this comes up in kind of like a color coding severity sense. There are a few organizations that have implemented that, and also it's an idea that independently many community members came up with in consultation, which is the idea of like, if a bad date is, let's say, violent or involves robbery, you code it red. If it's coercion, maybe that's orange. Yellow could be like creepy behavior or time wasting, something like that. Those are just examples. But that was an idea that has come up a lot. And we have to think about this like not just in the sense of like a digital system. I think often when we're talking about what this is going to be, we're thinking like, oh, what's it going to look like on my phone? What's it going to look like on my computer? But that's not accessible to everybody. So making sure we're thinking like, okay, how do we make a paper booklet or a paper form like searchable? Like how do we make it so it's easily skimmed through so that people can pull out the information that they're looking for and need quickly? Yeah. The last point I wanted to make with this one is that something we heard a lot from organizations that do manage to cross over sectors is that typically, I hate to talk in generalizations about sectors, but I'm going to anyway, I guess. Typically, folks were hearing that outdoor workers kind of had a higher threshold for what was considered like acceptable violence. There was a lot more like, oh, what I experienced wasn't that bad, I'm not going to report it. And when you're kind of integrating those spaces and outdoor workers are seeing indoor workers reporting things like creepy behavior and time wasting, all of a sudden there's this sense of like, oh, if that's reportable, then what I experienced is absolutely reportable. And so it brings that threshold down a lot. The next kind of strategy is having just a variety of mediums for collecting and distributing reports. This ties into that fact that like there's so many sectors, all those sectors have different needs. Just for examples, like ways to collect reports can be like in person with a staff member or a peer, filling out a paper form, using a website. using a potential app. There's been a lot of talk about the possibility of an app. We don't know if that's going to happen. There's a lot of people who want it. There's a lot of people that don't. Voicemail. A lot of people really want a voicemail service. Text message. Offline capture is just the idea of being able to, if you have a phone and you're either not connected to a data plan or you're out of range, being able to capture that report and have it upload once you get into the service. And reporting with peers was another thing that a lot of people wanted as well. For distribution, paper, I don't know if y'all have seen the bad date booklets that Toronto does. But they do this cool thing where they like fold the piece of paper and cut it in a way so you get like a little booklet. And then you can unfold the booklet, and on the reverse side is a form you can fill out and like resources. So we have permission to steal that idea, and we're absolutely going to, because it's great. And they're like pocket size, it's very cute. Word of mouth was a huge thing that's come up with like everybody, is like, that's just a need that people have to get connected with services, to get information. Word of mouth is king in a lot of these, especially in those smaller communities where having something on paper or having something on a website can be really, really risky. Okay, web, app, alerts, which could be a phone alert, a text alert, email, putting up a poster in a service space. And again, I just wanted to highlight search because everybody really wants it to be searchable. Another idea is just having kind of, again, some varied options for registration and sharing. By registration, it's kind of what I was talking about with privacy and accessibility. Having different ways for people to get access to that space. If there is a component that is just self-identification and you can access it by self-identification, there's a part for that. There might be a part for folks who have read and agreed to a certain group agreement for the system. There could be one that does require a vouch or some other sort of proof. There could be something for like a tier for folks who've proven, who've shown their understanding of those group agreements. So having those different tiered options and then giving people the opportunity when they make a report to choose which of those groups, or all, or none, or whatever, reports get shared with. So really giving people the ability to choose who and where information gets shared. Maybe folks only want stuff on paper, maybe they only want it digital, maybe they only want it within their local community, maybe they only want it outside of their local community so it can't come back to them. Really just giving people a lot of control over who and where their reports are shared with. This point has kind of become like a bit of a focus, like almost like ethos or philosophy for the project, for me at least, is this idea of like integrating existing systems, supporting existing networks and relationships. So like something we've really heard from those community consultations is that people's first line for getting information, for supporting one another, is their peers, it's their friends, family in some cases as well. Then kind of like organizations like BC BDAR or like frontline service organizations kind of start to come into play. So recognizing that like the sex work support networks that are out there are all these different little community pods, you know, formal or informal. And recognizing that the point of bad date reporting is to connect and facilitate communication between these groups rather than trying to kind of steamroll over them and be like, hey, this is our system. You have to put every report you can into here. Just, yeah, supporting, connecting, and getting folks who maybe new to sex work, maybe new to BC or various communities, getting them connected with new community groups. Or folks who've been in BC and doing sex work forever who just don't have those connections to community, finding ways to utilize this system to connect folks. The other aspect to that is also the bad date systems that already exist across BC. Some of those systems are purely analog, some of them are in various levels of being digital, some of them are brand spanking new and really cool. Looking at him in Surrey Women's Center back there. And so like making sure that we are integrating those systems, connecting with them rather than just like trying to replace them, which would be counterintuitive for everybody. The last kind of idea of my big 5 ideas is just the need for hiring peers. Everybody is on board with that, funders, orgs, community members. And also recognizing, like I was talking about with all those different like community support networks that are already existing, there's so much of this work is being done informally without pay. And so if we can find ways to kind of like formalize getting paid to folks who are already doing this work, that would be awesome. And it's something that folks really are interested in. Potential places we could hire folks is like literally everywhere. But in particular, moderating reports as they come in, moderating people who are registering for a system, actually taking those reports, distributing the reports, de-identifying them if there is some level of de-identification that needs to be done, fucking everything. All right, so those were my big 5 challenges, big 5 ideas. Coming back to these caveats, again, all of this is really asterisks at this point. These are all ideas. We want to continue these conversations with y'all to figure out what folks need and want. So no promises, but the last thing I wanted to really do a quick rapid fire session on is like, everything I've been talking about so far is really classic, typical bad date reporting that we've already seen out there. We've heard in our environment scan and our community consultations a lot of really cool ideas for like new stuff, extended features, and I want to do a quick rapid fire session of that. Those caveats are like extra applicable here. We might have 1 or 2 of them in our first version, but yeah. So quickly, those are caller ID. So just immediately when you get a call or a text, it pops up with that color coding saying if reports have been made about them, how many reports have been made, etc. For extending that to outdoor workers, being able to text a license plate number to a number and immediately get a response back on any listings that have been made for that license plate number. Potentially partnering with the 24/7 crisis line in order to have 24/7 access to somebody who can support you and take reports and is like trained in order to do that. A kite string service of some sort, so connecting like peers with one another so that you have someone that you can follow up with either during or after a date. And that really ties into that bit around timing. That would be a really awesome opportunity to take a report in the moment. Green list was something we were really hearing from community. Folks really wanted the possibility to report like good dates and to be able to share those and be reassuring. A decentralized system would be the possibility of if somebody doesn't want to share with like the wider BC BDAR platform or whatever, they can just make their own little pod on our servers, or they can take our technology and put it on their own servers if they don't trust us or whatever. Like, yeah, being able to decentralize that system is a little bit. Cloaking is just making sure that whatever it is that we build isn't immediately apparent. Like if somebody looks over your shoulder while you're on the phone or filling out a form, it's not immediately apparent what you're doing, and they couldn't follow up with it particularly easily. Community statistics is something we've heard a lot about. There's certain frustrations that folks have around statistics being kind of potentially gatekept by organizations, so being able to share those with community members is something folks want. There's potential privacy concerns with that, so like that's another caveat. Suggested results, so if you're making a report and there's similar reports that have happened, it'll suggest those. Hey, do you want to connect with this person? Do you want to review this? It could be helpful. And the very last one is like an info sheet generator after a report. So you make a bad date report in whatever language, and at the end it gives you like a little pre-printout you can print that has kind of what your a printout for you to take to the hospital, to take to COPS if you wanted to go to the COPS, that has a brief description of what happened in plain language, what services you need, what rights you have, and what you're entitled to in those circumstances. And this is particularly helpful for folks whose English skills might not be the best. If they can report in their own language and it gets translated, put in there. That's something that one of the organizations that we've talked to already does and has said was really easy to make and super successful and helpful for folks. So yeah, that was my very rapid fire, breathless, yeah, everything there. I think I'm feeling good to take questions if we have time. Cool.
We can do, 10 minutes. Is it?
Dreamy.
Here,
Hi, Ashley. Thanks for the presentation. You guys, that was really great. I'm just wondering, can you touch on kite strings and elaborate a little bit more on what that is in context for me? I've just never heard that term before.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was to elaborate on the term kite strings a bit. I'll admit, when somebody used this in a community consultation, I also did not know what it meant. But yeah. It's like having somebody who checks in on you either during or after a date. So it's kind of like the rescue phone calls when you're on a like Tinder date or whatever. It's just somebody that you check in with, make sure that you're good, clear it, and then yeah, you can potentially take a report in that instance as well.
Great. Is that a term that's being used frequently in this industry, that language that maybe we should be incorporating in our own language organizationally?
Maybe not organizationally, but certainly be aware of it as a term, so if folks use it. Like, I don't think anybody's gonna get mad if you end up using it, but like it might, because it's a term that we as sex workers are using to talk about things together. If it's a support staff who's maybe not familiar with sex work, it could come across a little clunky, I guess.
Yeah, I was more inferring about our safety app and how we would link to something like, and instead of using something like SOS, we use the word kite string instead, because it have that fundamental aspect of reaching out to somebody to let them know that they're safe before or after a date.
Totally,
So that's
yeah.
the context I was kind of thinking of.
Yeah, I would check with like the community members that you're working with to see if it's language that they're using, but if it is and they're cool with using it, then go for it.
Hi, just following up on what the last person was just saying, I believe safe call is the most commonly used term. I could be wrong, but safe call is what I'm familiar with, and I think that would just be, used interchangeably with kite strings. I think kite strings perhaps is more of like a academic, like our research and application side, as opposed to like the colloquial language. But if that helps, there's different words for the same process, the same thing. So it's just code switching. Would you say that's valuable?
Yeah, I mean, the term kite string I heard a lot from community members for sure. Okay. It could just be a regional, like West versus Ontario thing. Right. Yeah, it's so many different terminologies for sure.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to that, but my question is simply, first of all, my commendation. This is wonderful. I think, especially with your technical skills, Courtney. It's amazing how much you've provided to this project, and your facilitation, Andrea. I'm just very impressed by both of you, so thank you so much. And also, I would really love to see a project like this, your project specifically, expanded nationally, like that, human trafficking hotline, for example. Like that, I would love to see a project funded to the tune of $140 million like this, because I think that'd be a lot more effective, a lot more productive, and a lot more centering around the dignity of people's. And so, just with that comment, my question is, if you could dream, if we're talking about really take funding, take I have to get permission out of your mind, what would you like to add to this project if you could add anything?
Oh, me personally?
Yes. And Andrea, if you want to answer individually as well, it's up to you.
Oh, I mean, okay, my safeguard answer would be like whatever is coming from community the most. If it was me personally, damn, it's hard. I think the kite string safe call piece and the caller ID piece were things that were really coming from community, and I think that would be like, that'd be awesome. It would be so demonstrable how helpful that could be for folks, I suppose, with phone access. There would be a bit of a limit there.
I think that's a really innovative idea, by the way.
Yeah, so
function of the code coloring, I think that's really innovative.
totally, yeah, and that came straight from community, like, so yeah. That's just my personal take, but it's really gonna come down to what we see in the yeah. Did you wanna?
Yeah, for me, it's, well, honestly, everything here. But I guess from a project management perspective, like the idea of having a decentralized system. So we know that funding comes and goes. We know that governments come and go, and their openness to fund anything to do with sex work or, you know, versus human trafficking or whatever, it fluctuates so much. So to have a decentralized system where we know, like, at least bare minimum what we've created can like live on in perpetuity, and people can like pick that up and do what works best for their community. To me, that's something that's like I really, really hope that we can build in, because holy hell, is money ever hard to come by. Yeah.
Thank you.
And to quickly expand on what Andrea said, like the decentralized model would, like, if we lost funding, like that technology would still exist. Anybody could grab it and run with it if they got funding, and it could be extended nationally, like you were mentioning. Yeah, next question.
Just to touch on something that said that your concern is what to say with the people that you work with regarding kite or safe calling. What myself and what my colleagues in the industry have done is just something as simple as just texting in and out. Like when you, like whether you're going to an out call or an in call, whether the client is arrived or whether you've arrived there, just something as simple as just in when you've arrived at the space or when the client has arrived, and then out, just so that you have that indication of knowing like the time frame of the session. Because of course sometimes calls can last longer, sometimes they can last less, you know, so just something is just one word, and then maybe having a safe word, you know, borrowing from the key community, having like a safe word with that specific person to be like, if you receive that text message, then you know that there's something going on and you can be more aware. So just things like that for those in organizations who work directly with sex workers. Yes.
If that person goes to the bathroom, if they have an emergency, go somewhere like it's so incredibly important to have a guarantee. We do a minimum.
I'll just quickly literally amplify what was saying there. The making sure that there's, for kite strings or for connecting with folks, to make sure that there's multiple people available so that there's somebody that's always available, so if somebody goes to the washroom or whatever, there's still access.
I'm just curious, so what is this through like the connections that you guys formed, that, so when there's a response that like something's happening, right? So like distress contact, what is being done then? Like, I'm just curious, is that something that people would set up between that connection? Like say, you know, the date gets violent, what is like this kite string kind of thing gonna do? Because if we're not calling police, right? Like ideally, if we're not calling police, what is the form of security that like we're getting from that Does that make sense?
Totally, yeah. I think the way that systems like this that are peer run, which ultimately like we would hope ours would be as well, is really like, it's more about immediacy of response. What that response is really is up to the peers who are using it, whether that's something that has been agreed upon beforehand by the folks using it, or is some sort of agreement or commonality to that particular group. Yeah, I think it's the exact how to respond is open for community members to decide what feels safe and helpful in those moments.
Can I speak to what our community actually does in those instances? Okay.
Yeah, go for it. Maybe just grab a mic so everybody can hear.
So when you sign up as an in-person worker to use our two points of contact system, you give us your preferred first responders, whether that be your partner, your best friend, 911 that is non-police. You can ask us to call fire or ambulance, and we will contact your preferred first responder if you give us your emergency signal.
Amazing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you for this incredible presentation. Let's just give them a round of applause.